As you travel through the furthest reaches of the galaxy, you pick up a distant transmission. Signal received. Decrypting message.
Welcome to STARCHIVES, presented by Starforce Collective, a crew of spacefaring illustrators on a mission to record nerdy shit for the hope of future generations. Hello, welcome back to STARCHIVES, your cosmic library of everything geeky and nerdy. I am Commander Alex, and on my left, as usual, is First Mate Hunad Taj. How's it going, Hunad?
It's going well, as always.
How have you been this past week? I haven't seen you in forever, man.
It's been alright, been busy aboard the ship, gotta make sure that, gotta pick up someone's slack.
How do we not see each other in like a week aboard the ship? How big is
the
ship?
ship? It's a big ship.
It's like the Nostromo from Alien. It's like a skyscraper.
Well, sometimes you go in away missions, and it just takes time. You gotta,
Away
surface
missions,
levels.
yeah. Away missions.
Away.
Okay.
I just had to go away.
Just had to go away. I didn't want to be here anymore. And as you could probably tell by his distinctive voice, hello, Kurt. You're back.
Hello, I am.
How's it going, man? More science to do?
More science to do.
Awesome.
This is how you talk to a science officer.
More science to do, Kurt?
Why, yes.
Why, yes.
If I have the funding and the clearance from the ethics officer.
Oh, we don't need clearance out here.
Well, you don't have an ethics officer yet, do you?
No. Well, that'll be the next guest. Yeah, if we ever bring Danielle on, she can be the ethics officer, I guess.
All right.
You can tell her that. That'll be the incentive to come aboard. This week we're going to talk about a more general topic of retro gaming. I'm going to speak on what I kind of grew up with, and I think we'll go from there. So I started off, my very first video game system was a Game Boy Color that I got when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Started off with Pokemon Yellow. It was my very first game, and just fell in love with video games after that, much to my parents' chagrin. Couldn't get me to go outside after that, I'll tell you.
What is this outside? It's just a vacuum out there, man. You can't go out there anymore.
Well, back when I lived on Earth, man, before I launched myself into space, using all my government funding from this show, it's $10 million an episode,
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't take much of that money to get into space. So that's kind of where I...
It would take so much more money.
It would. Isn't it like 90 million or something? That's like the baseline to just be a visitor into space.
I hope you start a Kickstarter for this podcast and then waste all the money recording a single 10-minute episode in space.
That would not be a waste at all. That
Who
would
would
be
go?
amazing. We could just go with Chris Hadfield. We'll invite him on the show, and then he'll take us with him next time.
Maybe he'll sing us a pleasant medley along the way.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Maybe he could do our new intro. Like when we finally re-record the intro, he can do it. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be pretty great.
It's never gonna happen.
Hey, who knows?
It's a pipe dream, not.
I like to keep my options open. It might happen.
Are those away missions like exploring different shows that you're just gonna leave me drifting out here in space?
Never.
That didn't sound convincing, but anyway, Pokemon Yellow was my first video game. Pretty much ever, I guess. The first one I owned. I had a few other titles for. I guess titles would be what you call them. For the Game Boy Color, I had the Tarzan movie tie-in game for the Game Boy Color.
Oh man,
of course you did.
That one was so hard. You couldn't fucking play it. It's unbeatable.
Listeners, you don't understand how much old Captain Alex over here loved the Tarzan movie.
Grade 5, man. Grade 5.
I think he still has dreams about Phil Collins.
Hey, I still have that. I have that soundtrack on my iPod. No.
It was a decent movie.
No shame.
Yeah.
No shame.
It was enjoyable.
It's well animated.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually really well animated. It's one of the last ones they did where it's all hand drawn. That might not be right. We're not going to fact check it. Whatever.
This isn't about Disney animation. This is about
needless to say,
games.
the retro game Tarzan for the Game Boy Color was horrible, and I could never beat the first level, and I eventually found a cheat code that would let you get to the point where you could be adult Tarzan, and fight the saber-toothed tiger or the leopard.
The leopard. Yeah.
Sabor, as she was called, and that was hard as fuck. Like I could never get a hit in. Like there's no way to do it. I'm sure there's someone out there who could beat it with their eyes closed, but couldn't do it when I was 8. Not gonna try again now.
YouTube speed run Tarzan original Game
For
Boy.
the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up. Maybe it's better now.
Some good old capture card action from the Game Boy Color.
Ooh, yeah. But that's Pokemon Yellow, man. That pretty much started it all. Like I had Yellow. My brother had Red. You had Blue, actually.
I did have Blue.
You had the Blast.
I don't even know weak ass Pikachu following me around.
Yeah, that was a little odd.
I started with Yellow as well, but that wasn't my first game. That was my first Game Boy game. Yeah, my first like little personal handheld.
Ooh, what was your first game then?
Oh man, F-Zero X for the N64.
Oh, badass.
Yeah,
Nice.
that game is pretty sweet.
You know, I've never played it.
I have it still. We should totally have like a retro gaming night.
Oh, we totally should. That'd be amazing. Yeah, we'll set that up. Maybe we'll record something there too. Anyway, Kurt, what was your first video game experience, if you can remember it?
I believe my earliest experience was on the original Game Boy, that famous gray brick.
Yep.
It was with Super Mario Land, not to be confused with Super Mario World, the well-esteemed adventure with Yoshi through the ages. Super Mario Land was a weird production under a different director at Nintendo than they had used for the previous Mario productions. So it had all sorts of enemies that you never saw again. It had Daisy, actually, I believe, was who you were saving.
Okay.
And you never saw her again until Nintendo pulled her back from the depths. All sorts of weird songs that you didn't see in previous titles and didn't see for years hence. Gosh, it was a very strange one-off to be introduced to the Mario series, but it was great. I loved my Game Boy. I loved the stupid contrast knobs that you could use to try to see anything. I loved trying to beat the same levels over and over again and being tremendously terrible with my baby fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Asterisk, I was not an actual baby.
Just had baby fingers.
Just had baby fingers.
Didn't it take like 4 AA's to run that thing too?
Oh, an incredible amount of power.
Oh man.
I think with the amount of power it took to run the Game Boy, I could actually launch this podcast up into space.
We're already in space, but we do run on Game Boys here. That's what our engines are made out of.
Power source.
Just Game Boys stacked up on one on top of another.
It's really hard
About
because
50
we don't have any
there.
backwards compatibility.
That's as backwards as it goes.
Yeah, you can't really go much backwards than that.
Little backwoods around here.
Backwoods, yeah. Oh man. Actually, I should add an addendum to what I said before. While Pokemon Yellow was the first game I owned, it wasn't the first game I played, because the first game I played was actually at your house, and it was I think it was probably the same game, the Super Mario one. But the one that I remember most was when you got a Game Boy Color and you would let me play Pokemon Blue. I didn't understand that at the time you couldn't have multiple save files. And I didn't even really like being such a new person to the idea of video games where you would actually have a file that you would save and come back to later. Like it was completely alien, and you'd let me play because I wasn't going to save over your file. I didn't know how. And I just go through like the first little bit of it, fight Brock, and that was it, and then turn the game off. And then the next time I came over to Kurt's house, I'd start all over again and be like, oh, this is so fun. Like, oh, this is great. Like, look at all this stuff I can do. It wasn't until I got Pokemon Yellow that I was like, holy shit, there's a lot more to this game than just one guy with a rock. But Pokemon has changed drastically in the past 20 years.
It's gotten really weird in the way that it sort of presents itself. Like,
well, let's be fair, it's always been fucking weird.
But I don't know. There's like this weird sort of bizarre nature to it now. Like I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and we were talking about more recent generations where there is a Pokemon which is legitimately a bag of trash. It is a garbage bag with trash in it, and it evolves into a shredded bag of trash with trash coming out of it. Yeah.
This seems impossible, and
It's
I desperately want to see it.
I think it's called Trubbish.
Wow.
It is the most Pokemon name I've ever heard.
Trubbish.
Trubbish.
I could see that. Trubbish evolved into, I don't know, dumpster.
It's like Troubadour or something
Trumpster.
like that.
You will never get the job of naming
I
Pokemon.
will not, no, because I would just name them exactly what they are.
Trumpster is the name of the Donald Trump dumpster series. And that's all that it is.
Trumpster, president of Dumpster. Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay, we'll find out.
All right, so our science officer is going to look into that.
He's gonna conduct some research.
Sweet.
Maybe we can flash up an image of Trubbish on the screen for your YouTube.
I will find an image of Trubbish and any pre-evolutions or next
I think
evolutions
it's got
thereof.
two. Trubbish is like the baby form.
Oh man.
Well,
good.
They had like the original Pokemon.
Well, because he
series
starts
had
out like a trash shrub, and then he turns into like a little tree, like maybe like a sapling.
He's not like a bush. I think
So
it's
he's
like
like a
trash and rubbish put together to get Trubbish.
Trubbish.
Yeah.
So like garbage and trash could be. I'm not good at naming Pokemon. I'm not gonna try anymore.
Right.
We got it.
It looks like this, listeners.
Oh my
There
God.
should be an image. If you're listening to this on YouTube, there should be an image up right now.
So you're looking at Trubbish and Garbodor.
Unbelievable.
Garbodor?
Of course, that's the image.
What the fuck? What would it even do? Like what is it? What is the attack here?
Well, it's
Trubbish used stank.
I guess, or like sludge.
it's like a poison type or something, right? But it's
like
in,
okay, like poison gas, I guess, like
in, like,
coughing and wheezing.
Diamond and Pearl, there was legitimately just a Pokemon which is a bronze plate, and called like Bronzor or something like that.
Now, I just want to say this for anyone who decided to search Trubbish while they were listening to the podcast.
Oh boy.
The fifth image is already a sexualized version. In the Google Images results, it only takes you 4 steps of actual Pokemon before you get to sexy garbage girl. Real
Sexy Trubbish.
We are not going to put an image of that up on screen.
No, you can find that on your own.
You tackle that on your own time.
Oh my
listeners.
goodness! For those of you who want Trubbish porn, I'm sure it's out there. Apparently, it's out there.
Shockingly accessible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's
Okay.
all I needed.
Well,
to ever
34.
say.
Not sure if I'm just impressed or legitimately weirded out here. This is very strange.
But yeah, man, Pokemon's been a
Whatever
pretty
floats your boat,
influential
guys.
part of like the RPG gaming aspects of our lives.
That's for sure.
Like-
It's definitely, it hasn't really changed all that much in terms of like, I'm pretty sure it's still like the top down.
Yeah, the core mechanics haven't changed.
Overworld map,
Yeah.
you know, turn by turn system of battle and whatnot.
They've changed things where it's like rather than having one Pokemon fight, you can have like your entire
You have
team
2,
fight now.
yeah, you
Or
can
like
have
3
6.
or 4. It's just like everybody just go. Like it's a battle royale.
Yeah.
like-
Melee.
The rock paper scissors mechanics have been replaced with rock paper scissors lizard Spock.
Yeah.
So
Ugh.
yeah, it's pretty messy.
Well, I guess I'll speak on the last Pokemon game that I've ever played. Last one I delved into was I think it was Ruby, or no, it was Fire Red, which is the remake,
Re-release.
the re-release of the original Red version, and I like that a lot because you know what, I grew up with the original 150, original 301, whatever it is. You know, the silver and gold to me are still the best ones,
They're the shining examples.
as the name suggests. You know, you had red, blue, and yellow. Those were like the great backbone of the series, and then they advanced it really well with silver and gold. I think the best part about those games was that once you beat, you know, the what was it, the Johto region?
Yeah, Johto.
Once you beat that region and you're like, I am king of this area, you know, your Pokemon are like level 50, level 60 or something. Then you go back to Kanto and you go through the original game again, but with your like overpowered super Pokemon. And then you have to fight, you know, the original trainer from first
Red,
game.
yeah, you fight Red.
And
But
he's
it
got
also
the-
advances the storyline where
Yeah.
everyone's older. So when you go to Cerulean, you know, Misty's older and like Brock's older. They're all like it's like 5 years or something since the original game.
And that's pretty awesome. Because I've gone on record saying this before, that one of my favorite mechanics in basically anything, like whether it be a TV, movie, it's mostly TV shows where you can get to know the characters in video games. I like time jumps, where, you know, fast forward 5 years after you've had so much time with these characters, and then you get to see instantly where they are now, and then, you know, you slowly fill in the blanks through the rest of the content that you're experiencing. They do that in the anime Gurren Lagann quite well. I like that show quite a bit. And like you said with Pokemon, it's really interesting to be a different character in the same universe, experiencing what you as a player have already gone through, but basically with a new set of eyes. And you're fighting the same people, but they're different.
In the end, you kind of end up fighting yourself.
You fight yourself.
It's very like metaphysical.
It'd be really interesting if they did a re-release of those games. I know they have with Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I believe. It'd be really interesting though that if they took kind of a page from Mass Effect where you can import data into the next game that you play.
Okay.
If you had a Pokemon game where, you know, you do your thing, you beat the Elite Four or whatever, and then your 6 Pokemon, you know, at the end of the game, they get recorded when you defeat the Elite Four for the first time.
Right.
They get recorded as the team, like the lineup that you used. It'd be really interesting if they took that data and then put it into the next game, and you literally had to fight, you know, yourself again at the level that, or, you know, they could level it up, but basically the same lineup and the same stats and whatever.
Right.
You'd really be fighting yourself at that point. Because I mean, in at the end of Silver and Gold, you fight Ash essentially, or Red or Blue, whoever.
Well, Blue is always supposed to be Gary in the world, and Red is supposed to be Ash.
Okay. Yeah. So you fight Red, and, you know, he's got the Pikachu, who's level 81 and super powerful, and, you know, he's got the rest of the Pokemon. I think he's got like a Pidgeot or some other ones. It's been years since I've.
Well, he's got the basic lineup, right? He's got Pikachu, Pidgeot, Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur,
and something else.
And
Dragonite, maybe.
I don't know. What else does he normally have with him?
Mewtwo.
No.
You saved that Master Ball.
Yeah, it's like, I know those are his go-to 5, but because he always seems to get rid of everything except for Pikachu.
Well, that's just the show.
Yeah.
The show is kind of dumb because it's got to reinvent itself and be like, well, he can't hold on to 6 Pokemon forever, because if he does, then we've got nowhere to go, and we need to keep people invested in. Or
might have been Heracross. I don't know.
Who cares? Anyway, that's enough on Pokemon. I think we've talked pretty much all that we need to about it.
Well, we love dogfighting Pokemon because it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. I was always a big fan of Alakazam. Actually, before we move off of Pokemon, real quick, what's your guys' favorite Pokemon ever? Kurt, is it Garbodor now? After seeing that sexy picture, is it Trubbish?
It's me.
Your silence is really, really concerning because you've been silent ever since we found that picture.
He's been thinking about it and been like,
Trying to store that one in the memory banks.
I don't know what I can do with this information now. My whole life has been.
So sorry, you said yours was.
Mine is probably Alakazam.
Alakazam.
Really big fan of the of how Abra is kind of like just the shittiest Pokemon next to Magikarp, where he doesn't do anything except teleport away, so it's really hard to catch him.
Yeah.
But once you manage it, and you can, you know, XP share him up to the point where he learns Confusion and can fight himself, and then, you know, he evolves into Kadabra, and the only way you can get Alakazam is if you trade him.
Trading with a friend.
And then hopefully you have not a dick friend who will trade him back to you, because, you know, there's always that point of contention with me and my brother where it would be like we'd hold each other's Pokemon almost hostage. Where it would be like my brother Matt, who we've met before, janitor Matt, He
got the janitor title.
Yeah, he did.
He's the space janitor / cook, so our meals are always a little bit concerning.
He burnt the chicken last time, man. So yeah, he's our janitor for now. He might rise and rank later.
Maybe because of this pokey feud.
Yeah, perhaps there's some unresolved bitterness there. But yeah, like it would almost become a negotiation where he would have to have a Pokemon that he wanted to evolve back, and that's the only way it was gonna happen. It's like, Matt, can you do you mind like just for 5 minutes trading with me? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that unless you can give me my Graveler back so it turns into a Golem. And I'm like, oh no. When did this turn into like a mob movie, or like why do I have to negotiate this? I'm like,
you boys are a mess.
Jeez.
That was always a weird mechanic though, the trading of like Pokemon to evolve them.
Yeah.
And I definitely avoided those Pokemon because I was just like, don't wanna...
because you just want to play by yourself, right? Yeah. And if you
just a lonely spirit.
I only exist in darkness. Yeah, so my favorite Pokemon's Alakazam, despite having to trade for it.
Yeah,
remains. It's probably a tie between him and Charizard, but Charizard's like everyone's favorite, so whatever. Alakazam for me.
I think mine is Scyther.
Nice.
Yeah.
Not Scizor.
Scizor's cool, but I don't know. I just like Scyther! Yeah, I just like the weird like cool raptor ninja thing, like that and Kabutops, because they're essentially the same thing. One's like a prehistoric version.
They both got like scythes for arms.
Yeah. I don't know. It was. I was like, oh man, it's got knife arms.
Well, Scyther was cool because he was like a dragon / praying mantis, but like giant.
And they always represent him being like this cool like ninja character too.
Yeah.
I guess in the more recent editions, like there's the frog like one. It's like Greninja, which is it has a really cool design because like its tongue is a scarf. Like it looks like Ryu from
that's kind
from
of
Ninja Gaiden.
Oh yeah.
And he's got like his tongue is wrapped around his neck like a scarf.
I feel like that would hurt for like after a while.
It's mostly just disgusting.
Ooh. So what about you, Kurt?
I will admit, I did always have a soft spot for the 3 early legendary bird-esque Pokemon. Nice. Those were always cool. Zapdos was awesome. One of my favorites.
Zapdos, yeah.
However, if I had to pick a favorite looking back, I was always a fan of the deeply troubling Mr. Mime.
Oh, yeah.
Those Pokemon that's just a little bit too human. Like Mr. Mime and Jinx are just awkward failed experiments from somebody's backyard. Yeah, I did love Mr. Mime because it's just such a weird enigma. Why is he almost a human but not quite? What's with this clown-esque design? I liked it. I really did.
He becomes the one Mr. Mime they encounter in the original show goes to work for Ash's mom after a while.
Becomes basically butler, right?
Yeah, basically like a slave.
Pokemon show all sorts of problems there we won't get into.
Oh, that's for sure. Oh my goodness.
Wait, what were we talking about this week?
Retro games. Retro gaming.
Yeah.
Sorry, we got off onto Pokemon because clearly it's played an important role in kind of our development in the video game culture. From there, because I didn't get a 3D system, like an actual console.
Something with more than like 10 bits.
Yeah, or like, more than 2 buttons.
Yeah.
Like I got a GameCube when I was 11. Finally got a GameCube, and I was like, oh man, this is my first system. And one of the very first games I got, other than Super Smash Brothers, which is a staple, was Metroid Prime. Now, I've mentioned this before in the show, but Metroid Prime was like, that was probably a turning point for me because it was the very first game I'd ever played where I was genuinely terrified, especially in the opening moments. Because Metroid, in pretty much every installment that they've come out with, some less so, but they really convey a sense of isolation. You are Samus, especially in Metroid Prime when you're behind the visor. You are Samus, you're alone, you don't have any help. Like, you got your ship to go back to sometimes, but, it's not gonna be like, yeah, good job, Samus. You really kicked that boss's ass that time. Like, there's no conversation that you can have. There's no human element to relate to. And particularly in the kind of the prologue part of Metroid Prime 1, you explore a derelict spacecraft that's been attacked by space pirates, and the very first enemies you encounter are wounded space pirates. And if you take the time to scan like the corpses on the ground and stuff, there's pretty grotesque visuals and descriptions of how, like, just kind of matter-of-fact scientific descriptions of like the subject's spine was severed cleanly in two by the falling debris, and like there's this mangled corpse on the ground, and you're like, this game is rated teen. And me being an 11-year-old kid, not having a huge background in like horror movies or anything, I hadn't seen Alien yet,
Right.
so I wasn't able to draw the parallels until later. But just playing the game, I was like, and the creepy, eerie music was like it was just perfectly done in an atmospheric way, and really set the tone for the rest of the game, where this is an adventure, but it's not really fun as much as it's like life or death. Like, Samus is constantly being tested to her limits, you know, because you get stripped of all your powers at the very beginning. You're left with a rudimentary suit of power armor, your blaster, and not much else.
Right.
And you have to go through the game, and you get more powerful as you go, but, you know, by the end of it, when you face Metroid Prime and you're all decked out, you still feel that there's a genuine threat there, because, yeah, you're super powerful, you got all the stuff. This big fuck-off Metroid robo-monster coming at you. Like, I never felt safe, ever. Even in the safe zones, it was like the brief bastion of solitude I could have.
I mean, and then sometimes you would go back to places that used to be safe, and there would be Chozo ghosts running amok.
Right?
Deeply troubling.
Those were the worst. Oh, God. Oh. And the X-ray visor didn't make it better when you had them. Because, like, yeah, you could target them now, but they still look creepy as fuck. Anyway, so that game in particular played a huge role in kind of my development into liking more mature toned games. Not necessarily mature like, oh, it's so sexy or whatever, or like, look at all this violence, but, you know, like sophisticated messages, and a tone that treats you more like an adult, I suppose, because that game doesn't really pull any punches.
Because it also, like, titles like that don't draw a line between, you know, like, what games are supposed to do, because they give the sense that, you know, games are for kids, and that was, you know, growing up, that was the idea. Like, you know, you play video games, you're a child, or, you know, you have nothing better to do. But it's turned out to be a much bigger media now.
Yeah.
For conveying, you know, ideas from anything from, you know, the basics of, you know, what it means to be a good friend, to like really heavy stuff about the wars that we've been through. Like, there's a game called This War Is Mine, which is like super deep about, you know, what it means to be someone who lives in a place that has been absolutely ravaged by war.
Interesting.
I highly recommend it if you play. It's a PC title, but I'd highly recommend it now. It's like a survival, tactical sort of game where you have a crew of people who sort of like come together to live in a completely blown out house, and you scavenge for materials, you build resources that you need, and you have to scavenge. And when you scavenge, you go out with one person, and that person could die, and then they're gone. So then you're with fewer people.
That's an interesting take on a war game.
But it's not. It's like a side scroller.
Yes, I understand. But the tone, well, not the tone, but the setting is war.
Yeah.
But it's not like Call of Duty.
You're not the soldier. You're just one of the civilians.
Exactly. You're not like, this isn't glorifying the violence or the doesn't make it into basically Call of Duty and Battlefield and whatever. They've become shooting gallery games essentially.
Yeah.
Like, you're not concerned about killing other people because there's no levity to it. Like, it's, at least in my own experience with those games, they don't really treat it as like, you know, there's no moral dilemma here.
Yeah, there's
You
no,
just-
there's no sense
they're
of
faceless
consequence.
grunts. You just
They're
kill
points.
them, and then
Yeah.
exactly.
You
They
get
may as well be. They may as well be just those targeting, like the
Target shooting sheets.
the
like
silhouettes of the
marksman sheets,
people
yeah.
say like 50 points on it.
Yeah.
And then like, oh, you scored a headshot bonus, that type of thing. It's interesting when games do take, not even more of a realistic, but a different kind of approach to a well treaded
territory of existing
yes.
media. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting we should be drifting onto this topic of more recent indie games, because if you look at the retro scene, you had so many titles that were pretty black and white,
Yes.
no premise, throw you into the world, and then there you go.
Had to start somewhere.
If you
right?
want an idea of what the story is about, maybe read the 3 paragraphs in the first page of the instruction booklet.
Yeah.
Want to know how to play? Read the rest of the instruction booklet, because we're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
Actually,
Even like the Legend of Zelda game, the original one, the manual has all the information because the game itself doesn't tell you anything.
whether there's technical limitations or it's just not the style. I was actually playing through it was a 94 title very recently on the PC. It was called Little Big Adventure, or Twinson's Odyssey, if you depending on how it was published. I've been going through some older games to practice my skills in the French language, because I can run them on my stupid laptop. So I've been sort of playing through the older ones with the French dialogue, which has been super helpful for me. But what you run into is sometimes games that were, somebody's Ocarina of Time back in the day are going to have the most hilarious, like, counterintuitive controls now. In the particular example I just touched on, which was actually quite popular back in 1994, one of the ways that you attack people is by throwing a magic ball, and it throws out in front of you. But it's in that sort of top-down isometric 3D perspective, so you have to use your arrow keys to change the direction they face, and then you have to throw it after that. Oh, the controls were a mess, but so much of the forays into the new sort of 3D modes back then did have that problem running with them. But I still love it. There's this arcade, pinball and arcade place in my city, Ottawa, called House of Targ.
Mm-hmm.
House of Targ is actually for those retro gaming aficionados. Targ is an old school game akin to Pac-Man or something like that, where you're moving along this maze, and you're supposed to be upgrading your ship and shooting enemies and such.
Yep.
But they've got halls and halls of these pinball machines and old school arcade games. And if you want to know how to play, the instructions are printed on the side of the arcade machine.
It's a cool place. I enjoyed myself when I went that one time. We managed to play, I think, like 10 or 15 rounds of Mortal Kombat on one quarter, because we kept swapping out people between 3 of us, me, Kurt, and Dan. And basically the way it would happen is none of us would be able to win 2 in a row, because we all sucked at the game so bad. So it would never be game over, because no one would win.
Right.
It would be basically player 1 would win, then player 2 would win, player 1 would win, and back and forth. And we didn't understand why it wasn't why we were still able to play after so long, but eventually, I think eventually Dan flubbed one, and I think you beat him or something, and then the game was like, "Oh, you win, fatality," and then it was over.
I mean, a lot of the older games are pretty unforgiving, and I think that part of that lends itself a charm. If you know that the only way that you can beat a game is through sheer practice of its irritating mechanics, then you do feel like you accomplished something.
True enough.
I think there's that aspect of practice too, which it still exists, but I don't know, like Smash Brothers was one of for the N64 was one of my before, like, you could count hours spent in a game. Like, Steam would tell you, it's like, you've spent 4,000 hours in this game, and you wonder what you've done with your life to accrue that many hours.
Yeah.
I probably spend like every day after school coming home and like practicing that game, like every day against like 3 AI at max level, just every day, because it was super competitive. Like all my friends played, and we took it so seriously. Like thinking back at it now,
Yeah.
it's like, why?
Well, I remember when Melee came out, and you know, I finally had a GameCube, and Melee came with it. And my brother and I would play all the time because we had 2 controllers, and we would either play on a team against, like just against other level 9 computers, or eventually what it got down to was like, okay, pick your best character. We're gonna play on Final Destination, no items, and like five lives, and then like it's gonna be a straight up fight, and that's just how it went.
Yeah.
And you know, it's fucking stupid when you think about it now.
But there's you know, there's pro tournaments and stuff now with like Street Fighter. The new Street Fighter just came out,
Yeah.
and they released it early in an undeveloped mode so the competitive crowd could get their hands on it and start practicing for the tournaments.
Fascinating.
Right? So, but and it's like Smash Brothers got that following too, where there's tournaments, and you know, if you want to be a professional Smash Brothers competitor,
I mean, you see some of the people who have just mastered it, like on YouTube and stuff, and it's just.
but there's no
Holy
fun in it.
crap.
Like the way that people play,
Yeah.
it's not like I've tried to watch like tournaments and stuff, and it's like it's not enjoyable because it's like there's a metagame to it, and it just just sucks all the fun out of the game.
Well, because it ceases to be about play your favorite character, and now it's like, well, which character is like top tier, which is the best suited against this other opponent, and like what moves work here and now. It becomes a job essentially.
I mean, it's a sport, right?
Yeah.
I've never been a huge sports fan, but I understand what people get out of it. If you're competing at that level, you know, a quarterback in the NFL is probably not going to be casually playing skirmishes with his best couple chums every night after school.
No.
You know, it's a whole process trying to getting yourself a skill set, and I think the industry is developing a way to give these e-sport athletes their amenities. You see in the Wii U release of the Smash series, every stage has a Final Destination version.
Yeah.
To make it more amenable to this kind of tournament play, and I think that's an interesting development for the industry. It's not an aspect of video games that I find terribly interesting. I don't watch many Let's Plays. I don't look at many speed runs. I don't watch many esports, but you know, I can understand why there would be a market for it for sure.
Yeah. Well, to speak on Let's Plays for a second, the type of Let's Plays I enjoy are kind of the ones where I don't even have to watch the game that they're playing. It essentially becomes a podcast,
Right.
where, like, just to talk about Game Grumps real quick, when they were playing Pokemon, they were playing Pokemon Fire Red. After a while, like, I watched maybe the first episode or two, you know, first 20 minutes of their playthrough, just to see, like, oh, cool, like, you know, they're going through Pallet Town and whatever, they're going this way and whatnot, getting this Pokemon. After a while, you know, especially with Pokemon, you don't have to watch it anymore because you know what it is. I played it all the time when I was younger, so I can visualize it. And it now becomes more about what they're talking about, what they're just chatting about. Becomes more of a podcast that you can have on in the background. And
Seems to be the general trend with the more interesting Let's Plays, where it's not about
it's not about the game, it's
necessarily.
about the people.
It's about sort of the relationship that people have and just the general banter that's going on. Like there was a while where I was watching like Minecraft Let's Plays all the time, but it was a specific group of people.
Yeah.
And you know, I tried to watch others. It just wasn't as interesting because it was a duo and they had a great dynamic between them.
It's the difference between watching a Let's Play and a tutorial. Because like no one, like I don't want to watch instructions on how to do better at Super Smash Brothers. I just want to see people I already have an invested interest in, have their own experience with that. Because it kind of feels like you're watching your friends play a game in the same room, right? Like it's kind of akin to that, that kind of relationship there.
But let's pull back to sort of like what we were talking before, where talking about sort of like our first real experiences with games, or like games that have sort of kept us interested in gaming over the past few years. right? So you said that there was
Metroid Prime.
Metroid Prime for you.
Yeah.
I think for me, one title it always stands out. It was the Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube. I had a PlayStation 2 before I got a GameCube, so I'd had a chance to play like the Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, which I absolutely adore. But there was something about Tales of Symphonia which stands out above all those games.
Right.
It's just like there's it's written really well. The relationship between characters. There's a story which reveals a lot, and then there's subplots which are revealed to you as you play the game. So the game will you'll be walking through the overworld, and the game will take a moment to have just a conversation between characters about something.
Right.
Something that just happened recently or something that happened a while ago. They'll just be like, oh hey, so you remember that time we were in that town and we saw this thing? It's just like there was companions don't travel without saying a word to each other and just fighting all the time.
Yeah.
Right? So it really built up sort of that relationship. And depending on how the story would go, the characters would have different reactions to certain things that you would say or do, depending on how close you were to them. Right?
And that's always an interesting thing. It's a great tool for developing your characters, is having your secondary characters reference things that either you've done or things that they've experienced within the game itself that you have played through.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mass Effect does this perfectly. In all three of the games do it very well. Like no matter what squad mate you have with you, like when you go onto the Citadel or wherever, they'll talk shit about like, oh geez, you remember what happened on that planet? Like that was pretty crazy. We almost didn't make it out of there. Like it's just little touches like that just inserted in there that seem completely just they seem arbitrary at the time, but they kind of work themselves in your brain a little bit, and they add just that little bit more to the characters, where if they just said nothing at all, you would never get that depth. A game I'd like to talk about briefly, or maybe not so briefly, is Chrono Trigger, because that game, while I didn't play it until a few years ago, I think it was almost beneficial that I didn't, because I was pretty much able to appreciate it for what it was instantly when I played it. For those of you who haven't played Chrono Trigger, it's an excellent game. I'm not going to spoil any plot points here, because regardless of how old it gets, it's an essential game to play, and you should definitely go into it without knowing a whole lot about major plot points. Suffice to say, it's excellent. The writing is top-notch and unparalleled, and just the simple combat, the mechanics there, even the graphics themselves are timeless, because it's got that 8-bit quality to them, where people like that now. People like 8-bit stuff because it's nostalgic, so I don't think it's ever going to get old.
Well, a well-made sprite was a work of art in some ways.
Yeah.
It's
still a specific methodology to making sprites. It's not just painting squares. Like there's logic behind how you make them.
Correct.
I feel like so many art forms stem from a very particular set of limitations that an artist works within. If you look at the art of Cubism, you see people trying to represent things with a specific set of artistic restrictions, like multiple angles from one direction.
Yeah.
Or if you look at something like minimalism, you're trying to get an idea across with as few things on the canvas as possible. And what you run into is this 2D, era-specific, limited by its technology art becomes something desirable. Even the music continues to be made to this day in the same style because people had technical limitations. What's really interesting about, well, they don't really call it 8-bit music anymore, they call it chiptunes these days in part of the industry. Chiptunes. Is that the machines themselves only had so much data that they could store. So rather than have one chord and that take up the whole processing power, you would usually have melodies that had to weave into each other in order to create a larger piece.
Yeah.
So especially in pieces like Chrono Trigger and others from the era, you can hear these elaborate compositions which were, by a technical limitation, products of their time that ended up being these very distinctive stylistic pieces, then I think that's part of why it lives on today. But that wasn't just what you were going to talk about with the Chrono Trigger series. I'm sure you had other ideas.
Well, I'm going to expand on that with the music thing, because that's important to address. With the limitations, and I'm going to say it again. I want to say it in every episode. Art from adversity. When you impose limitations on a creative person, it forces them to be more creative than they would otherwise need to be. Like, you know, you tell an artist, we can say this from experience, just draw whatever you want. That is the worst thing to ever say to an artist, because we're never going to be able to decide. Like, we need ground rules or limitations or like a framework to work upon. That being said, with the music, the fact that they were so limited by the amount of notes that they could, that they could have, like the amount of layers that they could convey, they couldn't do orchestral stuff. So by design, they needed to make these melodies simple, but they also needed to make them so that they could loop and be repetitive without being irritating. So from there, you get some of the best pieces of music in video game history. Like, okay, here's a good example of everybody knows the Mario theme. Just ask anybody. They'll be like, did it, did it, did. That's a single line of notes. That's not like, oh, it's so layered and stuff. You can make it layered with an orchestra. You can do whatever you want. It's the bones of that piece of music that matter. Like, if the bones are solid, the rest of it will fall into place. Now think about a game like God of War. What's the theme to God of War?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, because it's like,
I've played it too.
Kratos, that's something like that. Like, but you can't.
Something exactly like that.
Yeah,
I want to see a playthrough of God of War with Alex doing the soundtrack.
Kratos. But it's like, I've watched a couple videos about the people who composed the soundtrack to God of War, and their process behind it is very interesting, but it doesn't get displayed on like through the speakers, because it just becomes orchestral piece number 4.
Well, it becomes noise in a game like God of War too, right? Because there's so much happening on the screen. Like, there's so much noise from just the character doing stuff.
Yeah.
That music gets drowned out. But if you look at orchestral pieces, there's Sephiroth's theme from Final Fantasy VII, which, most people have an inclination of, they know what it is, but it's like dun, 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 dun. I'm not gonna sing it out, but it builds up, and there's a crescendo, and it keeps sort of that tension high, and it lives on, because they don't play it constantly.
Yeah, there's a specific moment where you hear the music, and when it happens, then shit just got real.
Yeah.
And I think I've said this before too, but in any kind of like action adventure anime show, or like they did this with Gravity Falls recently, and they did it in Gurren Lagann, they do it in a lot of them. When you hear the like the riffs or the theme song start to play in the show, you're like, oh damn, something's happening.
Like
because
Attack
you're
on Titan.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, specifically with Gravity Falls, go off on a brief tangent. Have you all seen Gravity Falls? At least a couple episodes.
I've seen clips and bits. Yeah.
Anyway, the theme song is pretty cool. In one of the last episodes, you hear the whole thing, like an extended version, and it's really interesting. It's like it's familiar, but it's also new at the same time, and it's got a lot of impact because of that. But cutting back to Chrono Trigger for a while, specifically about the music, one of my favorite pieces from that game is Frog's theme. And like, whenever Frog is on screen, like when you meet him, when there's certain plot points, which I'm not going to spoil because they're really cool, basically whenever he's on screen and it's important, you hear this specific theme and you get like revved up and like fired up, and you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna go adventuring, and like something cool is about to happen. And actually an orchestral score that works really well, I'm loath to mention it again, but Mass Effect, that's a really good score. Like I can remember how it goes, and it's I don't know. It felt like it took a lot of cues from the old way of composing those really simple melodies, and then just applying them to a more kind of meaty, kind of full-bodied sound that you would want in a game like that. Yeah.
I think in recent years, one of the more iconic soundtracks for me was the Red Dead Redemption soundtrack.
Ooh, good one.
Just because it's like a modern take on a Western style.
Yeah.
So you've got like, it's really, like, it's so moody and atmospheric. Like some of the tracks are just like there's like that rumbling bass was like, I can hear it in my head, and I can't, I'm not even gonna attempt to butcher it in my attempts at it, but look it up on YouTube. Like listen to that soundtrack. Like there's a track called Trigonometry, and it's just like it starts off. It's got like that feel to it. Like it's visceral.
It just feels like a Western, and it like the tone and atmosphere for it is perfect. And I remember playing through Red Dead Redemption, and towards kind of the latter end of the game, when your character is returning home finally, like this has been building up to it all this time. I believe it's an original song that they wrote for the game, plays in the background.
Yeah.
And you're not fast traveling. This is not a cutscene. You're riding on your horse into the sunset, going home, and it feels like a Western movie, but you're in control of it. Like it's like you're the director and you're like controlling the camera.
It's very cinematic, yeah.
Very cinematic, very well done. Yeah. So I mean, the old way of doing like the 8-bit scores and stuff is excellent, and it laid a fantastic groundwork for, these themes and the iconic music that we love today. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a great basis for where to start. Like, certainly you don't need every game to be Mario or Zelda in terms of the soundtrack or whatever. That's why video games are so cool, because there's always innovation and there's always new things to do. A great one in recent memory is Sword and Sorcery by the what's the EP? What's the name of the guys who did it?
I'll look it up.
Super Brothers, I think.
I think so.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Of course, music was a huge part of that game.
Yes.
You meet in-game the composer of the soundtrack as an NPC. Just fantastically composed. Very musically
I actually met
aware,
him.
though. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
What?
He was at Bit Bazaar this last TCAF. I went to TCAF, and then I went to Bit Bazaar, which is like a Toronto local game dev arts community, like local breweries. Like it's super hipster, but it was really cool because he was there, and he had like merchandise, and I bought the album from him. He was selling them for it was like a digital download for like $5, so I've got like a code for it. And he told me, I was so impressed and like just completely blown away by the way that the game soundtrack and like just how the music affects the game and how it sort of like builds up as you sort of, it's like, it starts off really quiet and then it goes, and it's just like there's modern elements to it, but it harkens back to like a fantasy aspects of the style of game that it is.
And
I think people realize how deeply important soundtracks are in building an atmosphere and creating an idea of a game. You see it implemented so many different ways. You see everything from the casual approach of the Grand Theft Auto series, acquiring a lot of rights to put on fantastic songs for given radio stations in the cars when you drive around, to the ludicrous approach of games like Katamari Damacy, which will pull every crazy composition that they want, but then also get over some singer-songwriters to put on some original music for the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And then you'll run into things like even a good web game has a soundtrack that you should remember. Like if you look at Robot Unicorn Attack, I bet you can't think of that without thinking of the Eraser song, which I really don't feel like singing, but the ridiculous 80s pop song, which is so fundamentally a part of that game. There's a crazy amount of approaches that you can take, whether it's being an incredible composer or just knowing the right pieces to pick to pair with your piece of work.
Yeah. Well, and music, I like how this episode has turned into a discussion of music. That's a good thing. I like that. But when it comes to games that actually actively use music as the main meat of the game, I'm talking about like Rock Band and Guitar Hero and that kind of thing. It's weird because Guitar Hero 2, and maybe this is because all of the songs were they were covers by the same people who did all the covers. Like, they still sound like the songs that they're supposed to be, but there's something different about that game against the myriad sequels that they made after that. Like, and maybe it's just nostalgia talking, and you know, the long hours that we spent in your basement, Kurt, playing that game for hours on end. You talked about wasting your time, Hunad. Well, there you have it.
Yeah, I
we
think
played
everyone
even more Guitar Hero than we played DDR.
Yeah,
And I played an embarrassing amount of
it's
DDR.
because DDR was so exhausting. At least with Guitar Hero, if you got tired, you could sit down and still play.
Yeah. No, I think, but Guitar Hero was totally different too in a lot of ways when it came out. Like, as far as the peripheral-based gaming has always been a thing. Like, you have, you know, the Virtual Boy, and you have, like, you know, the Power Gauntlet from Nintendo, right?
Yeah.
And then you have
It's so bad.
it's always a gimmick. Like, the Xbox Kinect is awful.
Goodness.
You know, but now we're moving into like VR and stuff where it's, you know, it's legitimately becoming a viable means of playing games.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that I think that the lasting legacy of the Guitar Hero series was not actually the gameplay that they did, which, although it developed into a whole franchise and Rock Band following it, what really came about from it that I think is interesting is very, very easy to access master tracks of these songs with the vocals separated from the instruments,
Right.
which led to all sorts of incredible remixes from clever little pirates on the internet who have used them in order to remix these things. Because usually you can only make... Okay, the best way to remix a song is if you can decouple these elements, which you can only really do with a master track. And to get that, you either need to go through the studio itself, which requires a production budget, which many people don't have.
So that way you can edit each instrument.
Right,
essentially,
because you can't actually,
Each
you know, it's
layer.
just like seeing a painting. You can't pick apart the layers unless they're already separated.
Or unless you have the PSD file.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same way.
Yeah.
So this separation has led to a bunch of very cool remixes for all these songs that have appeared, and it had a huge library at the time too through both series.
I actually remember, we'll talk about Rush briefly, favorite band, but when they released Clockwork Angels, they actually released a separate version of the album that had all of the tracks basically deconstructed. So the intent, I believe, was so that if you wanted to learn how to play it, you could isolate a track and follow along. Like, I think that was their thinking. I mean, they're super rich and they just like making music for the sake of it, so I don't think they're too worried about piracy. I doubt if it's even on their radar, but that type of thing is kind of neat. I mean, you look at oh man, I'm dating myself here, but you look at like Linkin Park and how they kind of messed around with their songs with like a remix album. It's kind of interesting.
Like a B-sides kind of thing.
Well, I forget what it was called, but they, like, after they made their first 2 or 3 albums, they came out with another album where they completely redid, I think it was Hybrid Theory, but they took out all the vowels and all of the song titles, and then they made them super electronic and like cut up and whatnot.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, neat little gimmick.
Well, remixes are always an interesting thing too, because it gives you a new perspective on a song. Like, if you listen to the Gorillaz 2000, there's the original version which you won't remember, and there's a remix which you know because it's the one that gets played the most because it has more character to it.
Right.
And it's like, you know, there's like, so then there's it's just been added onto by somebody else who's now taking that and like they've twisted the perspective into it, and it makes it an even stronger piece.
It's like when a cover of a song becomes more popular than the original.
Yeah, there's an interesting band. They're called Girl Talk.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
They released a free album a little while ago called All Day, and they've taken hip hop and rap and soul and like pop songs and paired them with like metal and rock, and they've like spliced them together. So you've got like the audio from from one track and the lyrics from another, and it blends like in an interesting way. So like I don't know most of these tracks, and they do a track list. Like they've got like a deconstructed version, so there's a timeline, and as it plays through, it tells you what track it's playing, like what song it's playing and when.
That's pretty cool.
So if you're ever interested to know what they're playing, so they've got like Lady Gaga paired with like I don't know, like Metallica, right? and they're not like things you would think of. Like you wouldn't think that this song would work with the music from this track.
Yeah.
But it does.
Okay.
It's like, it blows your mind, man. And I listen to it all the time, like still, and I don't listen to a lot of like R&B or rap music or hip hop. So
there you go. And I think that might actually cap off our retro video games.
Retro video games / music.
And the influence of it in games.
Well, that's an important topic to cover, so I think we did it justice.
I think we're docking now.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, yeah, that was a pretty fun episode. It went to a place I didn't expect it to, but that's how this show goes. We encounter new and interesting planets and new and interesting topics every week. I want to thank Hunad. Obviously, you're here every time.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're with me on this spacefaring voyage. And Kurt, thanks for being here again.
Well, no problem.
We appreciate all the science that you brought to our little show.
Of course.
And,
I should get back to my petri dishes.
I wonder what's going on in those.
Oh man.
Anyway, thanks guys for showing up again for another episode of STARCHIVES. We'll see you on the next one. This is Commander Alex signing off. Take care.